Healers. It sounds like such a big word with big connotations, almost untouchable. Join me in this series of interviews where I sat down with not only my shiatsu teachers, but also people I met along the way who helped me broaden my understanding of different aspects of healing. Through these interviews, I wanted to show how people who inspired me are everyday people with extraordinary gifts. Some I think are born with a gift, but they all have to work hard at honing their craft. However they have this power to help people to heal, one thing is for sure, their stories are amazing. Today's interview is with Dr. Karen Ward. Karen is a psychotherapist and shamanic healer. We talk about these two therapies, Celtic mysticism and more. Hi Karen.
Hi Lynn, how are you?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to this chat. It's going to be interesting.
As am I. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So Karen, just tell me a little bit about your background.
I've quite an interesting background, and in fact, you're talking to me at an interesting juncture in my career. I began way back in the days. I studied science in UCD. I'm actually a microbiologist, which is quite interesting in the times we live in. And I have been fascinated by the holistic since I was a young child, except I didn't know what that word was. And then over the years, I began to follow on from my love of yoga as a daily practice. And I began to study to become a yoga teacher. And then what happened was my students would say, oh, I have a bit of an ache and I have a bit of a pain. And I thought, okay. So then the aromatherapy massage came. What happened next was people began to relax on the plinth in my therapy room. And they began to open up and tell me all sorts of issues going on in their lives, challenges. And I realized, gosh, I really want to honor this. And that's where the counseling psychotherapy came in. And then to top it all off, along the way with reflexology and holistic nutrition, I recognized that the energetic, the soul or the spirit connection needed to fit in somewhere with this body and mind work I was doing. And I began with Reiki, and then I laugh. I discovered Irish Celtic Shamanism. It discovered me, and that opened a whole new world, Lynn, because it was the great, if you will, sacred umbrella that encompassed everything I did. Mm-hmm. And I brought that to an academic level in the recent years. So now here I am with all of that mind, body, spirit, holistic work. With the academic, basis, grounding to bring it back out into the world.
Okay. And just tell me a little bit about how you found Irish Celtic Shamanism, or how it found you.
I know. Well, I was the little girl who used to play with the fairies down the back of her granny's garden and thought this was perfectly natural, talking to the trees and the plants, and the bees and the birds, until in school I realized not everybody does this. And I was quick enough to realize that it wasn't appropriate in certain companies to talk about that. And it became very private. But as I came out into the world and really forged the holistic path, I met people who were tree huggers like me. Who, had understood what I was talking about. And I realized, right, there's a whole world out there. And as I said, it began with the physical therapies, the yoga, the massage, and then it went into the mind work. But it was when I came to Reiki, I had an opportunity to study, to hear about something called shamanism. Now, at the time, I actually didn't know what the term was, but I've been very blessed in my life to meet my dear partner, who's now my husband, and we recognized that our union, our wedding, we wanted it to be something very different. We were both brought up Catholic, but we weren't practicing Catholics, although some elements of that faith do resonate me, some don't, quite a lot don't. And it seemed right that we would be married by a man and a woman, since our orientation is a male and a female. Mm-hmm. And the two people that we looked to, one was a very renowned acupuncturist, and one was, she came from a craniosacral background. But I recognized they were doing something extra. And John was going to Gary, the lovely acupuncturist. I was going to Maura, the craniosacral. And I went to Gary and I realized, okay, what is this extra? And they both said, oh, it's shamanism. And I thought, okay, I really want to know about this. And as it transpired, Maura's teacher, Alberto Villalto, who's very well known in worldwide international circles, he's a Cuban American, and he was the youngest professor of anthropology in California at the time. He spent years working in the Andes with the tribal people who lived there. And he came to Ireland once to do this particular course.
Mm-hmm.
And I met lifelong friends in that course. I think a lot of the holistic community in Ireland were very curious about what he was doing. But for me, it was, what is happening on this land? I mean, if shamanism is mind, body, spirit, holistic living in tandem with nature, a spiritual wisdom path, what were our ancestors doing?
Mm-hmm.
And John and I both began to research that, to look into the ancient texts, but most importantly, Lynn, to sit on our sacred sites, whether that be Newgrange or the Hill of Ishnik or the Hill of Tara or up in the Phoenix Park, there's a dolmen up locally to us, and to ask the land to literally talk to all of creation and to tune in deep within our hearts. And that's where Slí an Cree, which is the Gaelic for pathway of the heart, our school of Irish Celtic Shamanism, came from. And it's been a series of recognition. I know you talk about this with your wonderful shiatsu practice, that it was less learning something new and more remembering something that was innate within you.
Mm-hmm.
You understood, yes, I know what's happening here. So it was like that for me with the shamanism.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, did it feel quite familiar to you? You talked about talking to fairies, but then it was like, oh, maybe I can't talk about this. So then when you went into shamanism, did it feel like, oh, yes, this is what it is. This is what it's about.
Well said. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm laughing because the term Celtic shamanism is a total misnomer. I mean, this was here on this island long before the Celts came, and completely embellished, and they brought their mix into it to bring it ahead, but it was pre-Celtic. And of course, the word shamanism comes from Siberia, but the interesting thing is the Siberian medicine men and women, they didn't give themselves this name. It was the Russian people watching what they did, their holistic practices, and they called it shamanism, which is translated as one who is on fire.
Oh!
It's also one who has died many times, which is interesting. So that's not just the big death, but the recognition of the eternal nature of our soul, but also the death of our childhood, the death of our mother-father stage, the many deaths that we encounter every day. So it's a very clever name, but I often smile to myself and think that their tradition, they got the brand name, shall we say, worldwide. So when you say Celtic shamanism, people have, okay, Celtic Isles, Ireland in this case, nature-based spirituality, holistic. And they go, yeah, I've got it. Even though the term, as I said, is a bit of a misnomer.
Okay. Karen, I see, is that St. Bridget behind you there?
Oh, it is, yes. I'm a big Bridget fan. At this stage, Lynn, I don't know whether I walk with Bridget or she walks with me. We're just inextricably mixed, but as a pre-Celtic Irish goddess, and indeed as a matron saint, the matron saint of Ireland, her practical, feisty, bringer of spring ways really speaks to my heart.
And is the feminine seems to be quite important in Celtic shamanism. Would I be right in saying that it's the feminism is really, or feminine is really celebrated? Is that more of a Celtic thing, or are they both just intertwined? Is it a shamanic thing, or?
It's a good question. It's more pre-Celtic and more shamanic. The Celts actually were a patriarchal society, Whereas from what we know about the ancient texts, the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of Mother Earth in particular, the tribe who were here on the island before the Milesian Celts arrived, their men and women were equal but different. So they had a different role with the tribe, but they were equal. So their medicine men and women were the same. Everybody, in fact, in the tribe had recognized healing abilities. When the Celts came with the more patriarchal end of things, it is said that the Tuatha De Danann split in two, if you will, and half intermarried with the Celts, so that it was a mix. And then the feminine and the masculine would have been brought up to a little bit more balance from their perspective, and then the Celtic ways would be mixed in with particularly the farming aspect would have been brought into the Tuatha De Danann ways. And it's said that the other half went into the land, went into the sacred sites to hold the wisdom for a time to come when humanity would need it again. And it is said that this time is now. And for a tiny little island off the west coast of Europe, I think you agree with me that we attract a lot of attention from world leaders who come to visit us. If you think on our national holiday, the worldwide goes green for the day. I can't think of any other nation, however big or small, that actually happens to at such a huge level. So there's something, I feel there's something about the Celtic soul having been seeded across the planet in the waves of emigration we've had. And interestingly enough, river dance was one of those ways to ignite that to awake that Celtic soul. And we live in very interesting times. And the wisdom of this land is coming up, seeping down, so that we have an opportunity to bring it out into the world.
Okay. Interesting times indeed.
Really important time at the moment. That, do you know, there was an interesting statistic I read in the newspaper that I actually recognized many, many moons ago. At the moment in our universities, in our schools, in work, there are more young girls. It's more young girls than young men achieving and forging their way ahead in the world, which is great, but it also means, where are the young men? We need to recognize that we're equal but different, that there's a parity, that it's not one over the other, that it's the two together. So I think we're at a very interesting juncture in life, and particularly here in Ireland.
Okay. Karen, just talk to me a little bit about how your psychotherapy supports the other work that you do, or do they work together, or do you like to keep them separate, or how does that work?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, that really speaks of my study, my recent studies. I did a PhD in DCU. What was happening was I was in my holistic clinic, which was in a particular room with a plinth, and I would offer shamanic therapies. And people would lie down, and there might be feathers or rattles or drums or whatever. And then in another room, I sat opposite, offering the counseling psychotherapy. But so often, as you know, people are attracted to you for something that you can offer. And somehow my counseling psychotherapy clients were recognizing, maybe even in subconsciously, the spiritual aspect. So they were saying to me, oh, do you know, I have the weight of the world on my shoulders, or I feel I'm missing something in my life. They were speaking about energetic blockages and what we would term soul loss within shamanic terms. And I recognized, oh my gosh, this is great. So I'd explain what I did in another room, and on another day they'd come back and we'd do that therapy. But literally out of frustration, Lynn, I wanted to marry the two. Mm-hmm. And it took me many years, 13 years, to research and devise a technique, which, it's funny, it's called the energy therapy technique, which means something to counseling and psychotherapy clients. technique. Oh yeah, it's like a breathing technique. It's like a stress management technique. Energy, yeah, they get energy, and it's therapy because they're in psychotherapy. I'm not wild about the name myself, but hey, that was what came forward. That's what I wanted to be done. And I recognized that bringing a shamanic work into counseling psychotherapy, I needed to formalize it. And that's why I brought it to DCU as a master's initially, and then a PhD. And I met the most amazing supervisors, Dr. Jermone from UCD and Dr. Lee McGann from DCU, and they championed me all the way. And of course, my psychotherapy supervisors over the years, I've had 3 over my 25-year work in this area. And we did it, we brought it to that level. So now I'm teaching other counselors, like therapists, psychologists, holistic therapists, how to do extraction work, how to do soul retrieval work, how to do afterlife transition psychopomp work, which is working with somebody who's died, who's not at peace, or there's a perception they're not at peace. So really heartfelt work, but I'm able to do it now in one person sitting opposite the other. And what's really exciting about this work is, Lynn, it's within the secular spiritual realm. So in other words, as a shamanic practitioner, therapist, I can work with a client who is of the Islamic faith, a Muslim, or a Catholic therapist could work with somebody who's from the Jewish faith, or somebody who's an atheist could work with somebody who's from an earth-based Wiccan. In other words, the secular means that it's what all faiths and no faiths.
Okay.
And yet the spiritual means there's a spiritualness somewhere, but it might be expressed in different ways by different people. And that's what's really exciting. If you will, the technique is a cauldron, a vessel, which holds wherever that particular client is with their issue. So very exciting. And I'm honored to have heard the muse, the call, and to bring it forth into the world.
Well, it's a real freedom way to work, because it's not polarized into, whatever Catholic saints or whoever might come up. And do you ever, when you're working, say, with someone of the Islamic faith, is there an issue with that you might not recognize their guides or things like that?
Well, the interesting thing is, once I or any therapist using this technique, it's inherent that we recognize the belief system of who we're working with. And once they feel comfortable and they feel that I can hold them in their issue, they tell me who their guides or who their helpers might be. Okay. So for example, one part might be asking the client, look, with this particular issue, you've got an opportunity to bring in helpers. And helpers is quite a good word, Lynn, because it doesn't have connotations of guides or saints, or it's quite neutral.
Okay.
And I would say, look, your helpers can be people you know. They could be people who've died, people who've passed away, but they can also be spiritual, such as angels, saints, deities. But they can even be pets or animals, anything goes. And then the client spends a few moments in private thinking about who that might be. And it might be that they know, like for me, I would automatically say Bridget, but the client might take a little bit of time to tune in and say, well, I'm really getting a sense of my great-grandmother coming forward. Or it could be Muhammad or Krishna or Amma or whoever, Mother Mary. And the interesting thing is, both myself and I teach others this technique. I say, look, ask them, what does Mother Mary mean to them? What does Prophet Muhammad mean to them? Because sometimes our sense of it might be very different. I once had an amazing session which taught me a lot. I had a young girl, I think she was about 17, and her helper was Pele. And I thought to myself, oh, the footballer, Brazilian football, that's a bit unusual. Okay. She didn't look like the football type, but and so I went with it. And during the session, she was really getting into her issue so well. And I said, and remember, Pele is there with his, maybe I said fancy footwork, or Pele with it striding down the football pitch. And she opened one eye and she said, the Hawaiian volcanic goddess, the. So I teach my students never always ask if you don't know, always ask. And even if you do know, maybe ask anyway, because your perception of this person might be totally different to theirs.
Just to be sure.
Sure, exactly.
And Karen, just you spoke there about soul retrieval as well. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, it's an interesting term. I mean, it sounds to anybody who doesn't know like, oh my gosh, your soul needs to be retrieved. And again, it's a little bit of a misnomer. In the Irish Celtic shamanic world, and certainly worldwide, our energy is a currency of spirituality. In other words, what you might refer to as your aura, or somebody else might call your vital essence, could be somebody else's soul or somebody else's spirit. So there's different terms to describe this. But if you think of our natural energy field as a jigsaw, in times of stress, trauma, challenge, it's almost like a little piece of your jigsaw knocks out of alignment or becomes disassociated for safekeeping so that the whole can survive. And then afterwards, when the trauma, challenge, or whatever is gone, think about it. You and I can recognize a jigsaw even if pieces are missing. We can see the picture, but this piece is missing. And similarly, so many of us go through life, expressing ourselves in the world, but there's parts of ourselves that have gone missing. And I'll give you a few examples. One might be, somebody could say to me, Karen, I've never really felt safe since that car accident. Or it might be something like, I really feel I've lost my sense of playfulness when, at that point my parents had to leave and I had to assume as the eldest looking after my younger siblings. In other words, the jigsaw piece that is playfulness or that's safety has knocked out of alignment or has been lost. And that's what is retrieved in shamanism worldwide. So soul retrieval is a recognized part of the shamanic path in all worldwide. But in the Irish Celtic tradition, it is brought back in a visualization, in a journey, as we call it. The ancient Irish word is imran. Lovely word, isn't it? Wonder voyage.
Mm.
And what I love about this technique is it's very much an evolution of our old ancient practices. In those days, you might rock up with your bag of Brussels sprouts or your whatever energy exchange you were giving the shaman or the druid, as we were called in these islands, and you'd get up and go, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I really feel I'm firing in all cylinders, and off you'd go. But you wouldn't necessarily know what they did. So the next time you'd have to come back to them again. And there was a little bit of mystery and smoke and mirrors involved in it. Whereas the modern evolution is I hold that vessel and I facilitate the client to self-soul retrieve. And I think that's really important. So they're reclaiming a lost part of self, mm-hmm. would be the modern term to use. And it's so exciting because, in other words, people go out after the session and they are empowered. They know exactly what the issue was, what needed to be done, and they've reclaimed this part of themselves. And I find that really exciting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of important I do shiatsu as well, to kind of for people to be responsible for their healing. It's not like you just go to somebody and we fix you or we heal you or whatever. It's kind of important for them to realize they're responsible for their own bodies and what's going on. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to say as well that as we go through life, we experience spontaneous soul retrieval. And it could be you've climbed a mountain, you're looking at the sunset, the moonrise, or I can think of one recently where I always felt that I couldn't sing, that I didn't have a voice, even though I was in the school choir. And I just had something about it. And I was led to go to singing lessons. And I was a bit nervous because of this. And I thought, oh my gosh. And really a sense of shame came up in me. And there was no confidence there, which was the lost piece. And the singing teacher said to me, so tell me a bit about your hidden singing. And I explained to her that I was in the school choir. And she was, oh, and I said, we had this amazing choir mistress. And she was really famous. In fact, we did a lot of work on RTE, and we were in the National Concert Hall and blah, blah, blah. And I said, in fact, at one point, she and her two daughters, myself and my sister and another lovely girl, we pitched for what would have been, do you remember there was a Jury's Cabaret? It was for tourists, so it was a supper cabaret. But the Burlington Hotel were looking at something similar. Now, in the end, they didn't go with it. And my singing teacher said to me, so your quite famous choir mistress chose her daughters, you and two other girls, to make a pitch to this really important thing. And I said, yeah. And she said, and you're telling me you think you can't sing? And in that moment, I realized it had all been in my head. Somehow I had picked up that I wasn't good enough. And maybe it was because the Little Loretto singers were really, back in the day, well known. And I suppose I was comparing myself with top-notch singers. Some of them are opera singers now. And so it was my perception, Lynn. It wasn't actually based in fact. And we continually, with those aha moments of insight, retrieve what might have been lost. But sometimes if there has been more of a challenge, more of an issue, and maybe 2 or 3 in quick succession, that's where we need some help to have the awareness to retrieve that part.
Okay, makes sense. Sounds so interesting. So Karen, I had it on social media that I was talking to you today, so I got some questions. So from Liz Hart on Instagram, Liz asked, have you ever had a guide come through to a client that wasn't good help, or are there bad guides?
An interesting question.
Mm.
The personal answer is no. And the reason being that I work, as yourself, I work with the highest Christ consciousness, the highest energy of love in my work. Therefore, I prepare my therapy space. I would bring in my ways of protection. And I recognize evil exists in the world, but I choose not to engage with it.
Okay.
And I work from a place of, highest ethics. And I would have done extensive work on my own personal shadow, being a human prone to mistakes and all of the usual, tiny little ego mind, humanity stuff. So when I work with a client and we call in guides, helpers, they would always be within that highest consciousness, within the light. Are there bad guides? There are entities that are dark or of heavy energy. I wouldn't refer to them as guides. I would call them entities is usually the word that you hear. And that can be what we might term ghosts. So somebody who has died and for whatever reason hasn't gone to the light, heaven, the other world, Valhalla, whatever you call it. And they might be that they've led perhaps a less than exemplary life. So they're frightened of being judged by whatever, or they would be carrying heavy energy. And in that case, they can be what's called earthbound. In other words, they can be hanging around a certain place, maybe their home, but they can also attach to somebody's energy field. Now, it doesn't happen as frequently as people think it does. And also, let's face it, on TV and in books and in films, anything like The Exorcist, they want to show the most dramatic way.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I mean, does it happen? Yes, but at a very short percentage, shall we say. The majority of people, 90%, when they die, go to the light, or, as I said, heaven, the other world, spiritual world, whatever. So if somebody comes in and they have, say their uncle dies, and maybe he's been addicted to a certain type of drug, and he's really scared, and maybe he's stolen to feed his habit, and from fear he might hop into, say, a nephew's energy field. And if they come to me, then together we can work to send him to the light, to where he needs to go. So the odd time people might think, oh my gosh, is my uncle a guide? In that case, he's an entity who needs to gently be guided as to where to go. However, when he gets to wherever he goes, and we're not going to find out definitively until it's our turn, but he could then come back as a guide when he has done his, let's call it, spiritual work, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
So if you think of the many traditions of the world, so many of the major religions have the angelic realm, or they might have saints. So these are holy people, holy creatures that can guide us. So similarly, in the Celtic world, the ancestors, so in other words, people in our family who have died, they can also guide us. What would Granny do in this situation? Just as much as Archangel Michael in one profession, or Buddha might in another religion. So it would be on the similar, on par with, if that answers the question. So,
it does.
My thing, not in my, the very word bad and guides, they don't go together.
Okay.
Are there not so good bad entities? Yes, but they're not guiding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
When they go to where they need to go, they might return as guides.
Okay. No, it makes sense. It's all making sense now. Yeah. And then we had one more question from Lulu on Facebook, and she wants to know what you love most about your work.
Oh, there's another great question. I'm just so passionate about this work. At this stage now, I'm 58. I'm a baby crone, getting to my wise woman stage. A colleague of mine, the wonderful Maureen Simon, had a great expression, and she was asked, what are you working at the moment? And she said, well, I'm just finished such a project, and I'm just waiting for my new marching orders. I thought this was fantastic. So back in the day, I think probably now, if a soldier finishes a particular commission, then they wait to get their new marching orders. So similarly with spirit, God, goddess, source of love, whatever you refer to, that transpersonal element, I've got to the stage in my life where an idea comes down. I'm walking in Phoenix Park, looking at the deer, and suddenly I'll go, oh my gosh, it's a great idea. And I go home to my husband, the wonderful John Cantwell, and I say, John, I have an idea. And he goes, really? Because he usually means kind of excited. And the interesting thing was, it's taken me years to realize, just because that inspiration comes to me, it's almost like spirit world is going, oh, we have a new project. Oh yeah, Lynn Pepper, she's, boom. And they send you that idea in a dream, inspiration, and you go, oh my gosh, these podcasts, yeah, I can do this. Or, oh, there's Karen Ward. She's got, yeah, let's give her this idea. But we don't always have to run with the inspiration, because if we don't do it, then somebody else will be inspired.
Okay.
But the other side of that is, if we sit on it and go, oh, I've always wanted to write that book, but oh, am I worthy? Am I ready? Guess what? Somebody else will end up writing your book. And it took me years to figure that one out. So I flow with what's coming in, and I'm just finishing off one project now, teaching the energy therapy technique to counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, and holistic therapists who've done their personal work and know how to keep a client grounded in the work. And already my Goddess book is coming in, and I'm getting nudged on the shoulder, do it now. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to finish on Friday. Oh, that's really exciting. And at the end of the day, the answer to the question is, I'm incarnated in this life to be of service. And it used to be, back in the day with the yoga, to help people on the first rung of the holistic ladder. Regular life, things ups and downs, and through yoga, they would recognize, oh, so there is a mind, body, spirit element. You become aware, self-aware. And now I think I've moved up to help people maybe on the 10th rung of the ladder. So that might be to walk the Irish Celtic path of spirituality, or it might be to bring the holistic element, the specifically energetic spiritual element, into their current work practices. And it's really exciting. I mean, I love it. It feeds me. I try to be of service as best I can. And, you know, who knows, it might morph into something else, but I really feel once that first yoga came in, I was in the area, the arena of the holistic world. And there's different aspects of it, but it's all under that same umbrella, so to speak.
And it looks like you love it, and it looks like you love talking about it, and you're so passionate when you talk about it.
Well, now I know I'm talking to a woman who knows exactly what that means, because it's zinging off you, Lynn, as well. So
oh, good.
We're birds of the same feather.
Yeah. Karen, it's been so interesting talking today. Thank you so much.
An absolute pleasure. An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
I look forward to your Goddess book.
Oh yes, great. On the phone.
Okay.